Chapter 8 of the Alps, the Danube, and the Near East. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Betty B. The Eternal City. Go thou to Rome at once, the paradise, the grave, the city, and the wilderness. So said Keats. Yet I think Rome is less than a paradise, more than a city, and far more than a wilderness of ruins, or the grave of an ancient civilization. There are many Romes, the Rome of the Forum and the Colosseum, the Rome of St. Peter's and the Pope, the Rome of the King and government of Italy, the Rome of the artist, the archaeologist, and the historian, and the combination of all these, the eternal city that is the pride of the Italians and the port of dreams for thousands. I am reminded of a story told of the learned Pope Leo XIII. He often asked the foreign visitor, "How long have you been in Rome?" If the answer was, "A week, Your Holiness," the pontiff would say, "Then you must feel as if you know Rome very well." If the visitor replied that he had been in the city for 6 months, Pope Leo's remark would be, "Then you have begun to look about you a little bit." But if the foreigner should say that he had lived in Rome for several years, the Pope would smilingly say, "Ah, then you have discovered that a whole lifetime is not too long to learn what Rome really is." The city seems enormous, for it is spread over an immense area. One reason for this is the fact that a large part of it is taken up with ruins, churches, and historic monuments of one kind or another. The town is actually no larger than St. Louis or Boston, but if you were to reproduce Rome on the site of either of the others, you would have to allot a big space in the heart of it for the relics of the past. The Forum, as big as an 80-acre farm, is surrounded by the business buildings of modern Rome. The Colosseum is another great field of stone and mortar right in the midst of the business section. St. Peter's and the Vatican occupy as much land as the Colosseum. Almost anywhere you could throw a stone and hit a church, taking up an acre or so of ground. Most of the city is on the left bank of the Tiber, rising partly on the plain of the ancient field of Mars, and partly on the surrounding hills. On the right bank of the river are St. Peter's and the Vatican. Modern Rome is confined chiefly to the plain. The heights, where stood the ancient mistress of the world, were almost uninhabited during the Middle Ages, and only within comparatively recent years have they begun to be reoccupied. Yet these 7 hills of Rome add greatly to its beauty. The Palatine, where Cicero lived and where Augustus, the first of the Roman emperors, built his huge palace, is now a park, and verdure hides the ruins of the halls where succeeding emperors lorded it over the multitude. A curious relic here is a little stone altar chiseled with the Latin words, Se Dios se divoi, to the unknown God. I have been told that this was set up to the patron god of Rome, and that only the priest knew the name of the deity to whom it was really dedicated. Even they did not write it down, but handed it on from generation to generation, for it was feared that if the common people should know it, one of them might betray it to an enemy, who would surely bribe the god with offerings and sacrifices to cease to protect Rome. Between the Palatine and the Capitoline, on which rose the magnificent temple of Jupiter, the most sacred shrine of the Roman world, are the ruins of the Forum. Upon the Quirinal is the royal palace of the kings of Italy. On the sides of the Viminal, the modern city grows apace. Last night I dined upon the Aventine, not going up in a chariot, on horseback or afoot, as did Caesar and Cicero, but in an Italian automobile, which landed me at the castle of the Caesars. Climbing some ragged stone steps, past ruined columns, we came out at length upon a stone platform where a gay crowd was dining in the open-air restaurant overlooking the myriad lights of the city. As we ate delicious food amid the laughter and light talk of the 20th century, my imagination unreeled before me a series of moving pictures. First, I saw in my mind's eye the burial of Remus upon this hillside, after he had been slain by Romulus in a fit of jealous rage. That was 26 centuries and more ago. Next, I beheld these slopes alive with the surging mob of plebeians, their hearts aflame with the injustices and oppressions of the patricians. There followed terrible pictures of the wild orgies of 7,000 men and women engaged in their degrading worship of Bacchus. Again the scene changed, and across my mental screen flitted a figure, frail and small, yet with an indescribable dignity of bearing. He moved about in a cluster of men with dark Hebraic countenances and long beards, who appeared to be hanging upon his every word. And recalling that he was a visitor to Jews of the Rome of 2,000 years ago, I gave the picture a title: Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God. But here my reverie was interrupted by the waiter presenting me with such a substantial bill that I came back with a jolt to the world of today. Since the spell was broken, I climbed into my car and was soon again in the midst of modern Rome. The principal streets of the business city of Rome are the Via Nazionale and its continuation, the Corso, one of the most brilliant avenues in all Europe. During the season, both of these thoroughfares are thronged with pedestrians and vehicles. A large part of the traffic of Rome is still pulled along by horses, though the taxis are also numerous and cheap. The old-fashioned Victoria, drawn by one horse, which the driver usually flogs unmercifully, is most prevalent. There are also red streetcars, which are a bit shorter than ours and get their power through overhead trolleys. Carts drawn by mules decorated with bells and colored fringes so that they look as if they were ready for a holiday bump over the cobbled pavements. Donkey carts are not so common here as in Naples. One of the striking things about Rome is the number and the beauty of its fountains. The finest of them is the Trevi, which used to be called virgin water, either because of its purity or because of the tradition that a young girl pointed out this spring to the engineers of Agrippa. They built a subterranean channel 14 miles long to conduct the stream that issues here to the baths of that warrior and statesman beside the Pantheon. The same aqueduct, restored from time to time, carries daily more than 17.5 million gallons of the best water in Rome. The Trevi is in the heart of the city, and in the evenings the people gather here and listen to its splashings. There is a tradition that the traveler who throws a small coin into these waters will surely return to Rome. As I stood on the edge of it yesterday, I asked my guide, "How much shall I throw?" From the crowd of loafers sitting on the edge of the fountain came, in accents unmistakably of the Lower West Side of New York, "Throw in $1 and I'll dive and get it." Evidently here was one of the many returned sons of Italy who had brought back from America some of our own ideas of what is good business. This morning I crossed the Tiber to St. Peter's. There are many bridges, but I happened to take the one named for King Humbert I, the beloved Italian monarch assassinated at the beginning of this century. Dominating the bridge on the right bank is the great Palace of Justice, of which my guide remarked, "It is a big palace, but has little justice." Under the shadow of the huge pile, I saw 100 or so young Romans swimming and diving, dodging about in canoes or sunning themselves on the sand. The Tiber was neither so swift nor so tawny as it often is. Sometimes it is a raging torrent of yellow water that comes tearing down from the Apennines full of the sediment it has gathered from the mountains and the Campagna. Because of past disastrous floods, the government has enclosed it with massive stone masonry, so that, seen from a height, the river looks like a walled fosse of the Middle Ages. One day, perhaps, the talk of making a ship canal of the Tiber so as to bring the Mediterranean right into the city may end in action. Rome is only about half an hour by motor from the sea, and if it were in the United States, the canal would probably have been built long ago. All the plans and the specifications are ready, and only the money is lacking. The approach to St. Peter's is through a great plaza in the shape of an ellipse. From the cathedral, stone colonnades, surmounted by more than 150 statues of saints, curve in half crescents about both sides of the space. 2 fountains play in the plaza, and in the middle is the obelisk which the Emperor Caligula brought from Heliopolis, the city of the sun god in the Nile Delta. It was first set up in the Vatican Circus at Rome, where Nero held his shows and chariot races and practiced his horrible cruelties upon the early Christians. In the 16th century, the obelisk was removed from that site to the space in front of St. Peter's. There is a story that Pope Sixtus V, who had ordered its removal, had decreed that there should be absolute silence as the obelisk was raised. But just as the men had hauled it almost to the perpendicular, it was seen that one of the ropes was slipping. Then a sailor in the crowd yelled out, "Throw water on the rope." His advice was followed, the rope tightened, and the obelisk went safely into place. The crowd held its breath at the thought of what would befall him for having disobeyed the Pope's command. But instead of punishment, his family was forever awarded the privilege of supplying palms to St. Peter's on Palm Sunday. Sixtus V, by the way, was that strong man of his day, of whom Queen Elizabeth declared, "He is the one man who is worthy of my hand." Though the plaza forms a magnificent approach to the greatest church in Christendom, the cathedral is best viewed from a distant height, so that one may get the full effect of Michelangelo's vast dome. Seen from the level, the dome is dwarfed by the great facade stretching across the front of the church. When measured by the eye in close perspective, St. Peter's does not seem as tall as the Capitol at Washington, though it is in reality twice as high. The interior is enormously impressive. One can scarcely take in the immense size of the church and the huge scale on which every detail is worked out. For example, the two fonts for holy water near the entrance to the nave have marble basins upheld by cherubs. When I looked at them from the door, these cherubs seemed to be about the size of the average baby. But when I stood beside them, I saw that the leg of each one was as big around as my waist, and that its head would have been a tight fit in a half-bushel basket. Looking across the nave, I saw the people on the other side as mere pygmies. So perfect are the proportions of the whole that it takes such comparisons as these to make one realize that here is space for 80,000 people to gather at once. The statue of St. Peter is a sitting figure of more than life size, cast in bronze that looks as if it had been alloyed with silver or pewter. Although it is not by any means beautiful, the statue is rather imposing. The head is very ugly, with hair and beard of short, tight curls. In the right hand, the founder of the church holds a key, while the left is raised in blessing. The right foot has been kissed by so many thousands of worshippers that it is smooth and shiny, and the first 3 toes have been worn down for an inch or more. Some say that the statue was made in the 5th century, others that it is as recent as the 13th. One story has it that it was originally a statue of Jupiter and was remodeled by the Christians who put on a new head and new arms. I do not by any means vouch for the truth of this tale, but it does seem to me that the bronze toga draped about the saint might have been designed for a pagan image, and the head does not appear to belong with the body. Beneath the dome stands the high altar where only the Pope may read Mass. Above it is a bronze canopy 95 feet high, made from metal taken from the Pantheon. In front of the altar is the tomb of St. Peter, to which one descends by marble steps. On the balustrade about the crypt are nearly 100 lighted gold lamps. Something like 500 years ago, the Roman nobles made up a fund to keep these lights burning for all time to come, and they have been glowing here ever since. Only the body of St. Peter rests in his cathedral. His head is interred with that of St. Paul beneath the high altar of St. John in the Lateran, called the mother and head of all churches. This church, which is in the eastern section of the city, was a part of the old Lateran palace bestowed by Constantine on the Pope of his day. Until the 14th century, when Gregory XI established the official residence at the Vatican, the Lateran was the home of the popes. It is still a part of the Papal See and is used as a museum of Christian and secular antiquities. St. John's has suffered so much from fire, earthquake, pillage, and the hand of the restorer that it is now little save a big modern church. I found much more interesting the Scala Santa, the building near the Lateran that contains the 28 marble steps which Christ is said to have ascended when they formed the stairway of Pilate's house in Jerusalem. They are covered over with wood to keep them from being worn away, for they may be ascended only on the knees, and generations of pilgrims have climbed thus from the lowest to the topmost step. Pius IX himself made the painful ascent in 1870, on the eve of the entry of the Italian troops into Rome, when the temporal power of the popes came to an end. It was while toiling up the sacred stairs that Luther heard a voice from heaven declaring that the way to salvation was by faith as well as by works. At Easter time, especially on Good Friday, many kneeling Catholics go up the flight, but fortunately for those not so devoutly inclined, there is a stairway on each side that may be used in the ordinary way. At the top of the steps one may look down through a barred window into the Sancta Sanctorum, consecrated as the private chapel of the popes. End of chapter 8.